the basics of how to create scenes for Decentraland. So I'm going to be focusing on SDK7 and some of the new features of the editor. Now, some of you who maybe are familiar with SDK6, I'll be brushing up on some of the more basic concepts that you might already be familiar. But the idea is for this to also be accessible to people who haven't built anything in the past. So the ideal place to get started is in the documentation, docs.decentraland.org. And if you check, there's like 3 large sections. We're going to always be focusing on the content creator section. And a great place to get started is the quick start guide. In this session, we're going to be covering content that is kind of similar, but we're going to be unveiling some cooler things that are not yet covered here because they're still in alpha, but I think are really great for you to take a look at because they're a lot easier as a ramp up. So the first thing you're going to need is, if you don't have already Visual Studio Code installed, you're going to have to install that. There's a link right here in the quick start, and it's a pretty straightforward, simple installation of software. Just like download it for whatever OS you have, and there'll be a straightforward wizard guiding you through the steps. Once you have Visual Studio Code installed, there's a second thing you're going to install, which is the Decentraland extension for Visual Studio Code. So if you look on the left, there's a whole series of icons. One of these is the extensions icon. Maybe this is too small, so I'm going to enlarge the screen so that, let me know if what I'm sharing is too small in terms of font or too large. So if you look for Decentraland, here in the extensions collection, you'll see that there are a couple of relevant extensions, but the one we care about is the Decentraland Editor SDK7. And this is basically with this, you have what we call the Decentraland Editor all set up. And as you can see, I'm installing it right now, and that's because there was an update that we literally just pushed minutes ago. We were just now fixing a bug that we were running into. So this is like right fresh out of the oven. What I'm going to unveil now is right. Like it hasn't been seen by anyone else, I believe. So since I have my screen so big, I don't see the whole set of icons here. But if I pick the Decentraland Editor tab, you'll see that here I have a series of options. Well, let me make this font just a little bit smaller because this is just too large. There we go. I hope it's all still readable and comfortable like this. So right now I am standing on an empty folder. So I can open whatever folder I want with this program, with Visual Studio Code. Right now I am standing on an empty folder, and because of that, I see an option that says Create Project. By the way, after you install the Decentraland Editor SDK7, you will have to reload. And let's make sure I'm using the latest version so that it all goes smooth. So right now, I only see one option, which is to create a project. I'm going to click that. And what that will do is it will just, I got to select standard project. Right now, there's just one option. The idea is to have a series of the different templates there, which we'll be adding over time. So as you can see, there's a little bar here. And what it's doing right now is it's taking this empty folder and adding a bunch of files, which are the default files of a standard scene. So you'll see that there's an SRC folder. This is where your code goes. This is where you write the code that creates the actual scene. And as you can see, all of these files are .ts, which means it's TypeScript. TypeScript, if you're not familiar with it, is a language that is very much similar to JavaScript, except that what makes it different is that it has types, as the name suggests. And what are types? Types are basically it's explicitly saying if any variable is either a number or a string or whatever. And that actually helps you a whole lot when you're coding stuff, because there's a lot less mystery, a lot less surprises if your program knows what kinds of variables it's dealing with. So as you can see, it's still building stuff. And now project created successfully. I have my scene all built out. You'll see that there are some things highlighted in red because it's actually not quite fully built until I actually run the scene. So I'm going to go back to my tab here, and I'm going to hit the Run Scene button. And this just opens a new tab here. Let me make this smaller. And what we're going to be running here is an actual, Decentraland scene out of the code I have described here. So it's a very comfortable setup where you can, write code right next to where you can actually try that code and see what it outputs in real time. As you're making changes, you can see those changes, manifest in your scene, and it's a lot more comfortable than the alternative of having to run a command line window. For those of you who are used to working with SDK6, you'll know that you're often having to jump between windows to make sure that you have everything running. And with this, it's a lot more comfortable. Now, what's brand new here is, if you notice that there's one more button here. There used to be just two buttons. There was Run Scene and Publish Scene. What we literally just added is the Open Inspector button. And what this does is it opens a whole separate view where you can position things in 3D space. And this is a really nice little setup. If you're familiar with the web builder, this is a very similar kind of tool. So you can move around, you can grab objects, move them around, rotate them. And this takes a lot of the more tedious tasks of writing code for scenes, like aligning objects by numerically getting them just right by changing the numbers can be so tedious and so time consuming. You also have access to all of the libraries of stuff that you had in the good old builder. So I can just drag any of these items right into my scene, and it just appears there. And I can then adjust its position rotation without really having to dive into the code at all, at least not while I'm building the whole visual side of things. But there's a couple of nice little things that the web builder did not have. For example, I am able to parent things to another. So for example, I can take this chest and make it a child of this cart. And what happens now is that if I adjust this, this chest, and let me get the camera right, we adjust this chest to be part like a child of the cart. Now, if I select the cart and move it, I'll see that the chest moves with it as well. And there's those kinds of nice little things that make your life so much more easy. Also, I can change the numeric values of stuff like the rotation via the UI. If I want to get 90 degrees exactly, it can be kind of tough when I'm rotating it by the UI, but if I can just change the number, it's a lot easier. I can also hit Shift in order to, for example, rotate things in fixed increments. Maybe with you're not able to tell the difference because of bad frame rate of the call, but doing this is not the same as doing this with Shift. And I can change the increments of this rotation via the UI. When I'm happy, I can hit Save. And what I can also do is run the scene. And so in parallel, now we can have both things, one next to the other, and see both the edit mode of my scene and see the actual playable output of my scene, one next to the other, and change things in one place and see the output on the other side. So give me just a second till this loads. One limitation of this, though, that I have to clarify is that whenever we add new assets to the scene that weren't already the scene, unfortunately, the preview of the scene doesn't quite load them right away. So you have to close the preview and open it once more for that new art asset to be loaded with the rest of the stuff. Something that we should look into and fix soon because it doesn't help. So just one second, and I have what I'm doing here running in the scene. So this is like the more graphical side of things. But of course, if I want to make things interactive, today I still need to dive into code. Yes, because I'm sharing my screen, it all adds up and it makes things somewhat slower than usual. So here we go. this is my scene, and here's my cart. And if I want to, for example, move my cart, I can shift it, save. Maybe it's too small. I save my changes. There we go. Did the cart just move? I think it did, but I was not looking. Anyway, yeah. I just rotated the cart. That should be a bit more obvious as a change. And if I save that, now I should see the scene reload to display that change. And 1 second. My machine is uncharacteristically slow right now. I think it's because I'm sharing the screen. There we go. Well, almost. Okay, so besides the positioning things in the scene, we're going to also dive into how we can deal with code. So let me get rid of this annoying UI part. And let's dig into a little bit of theory about what it is we're doing here with code. In the Decentraland SDK, there are three main elements, three, say, characters in our story, if you will, which build up everything in Decentraland. So there's entities, there's components, and there's systems. You can think of the engine as the stage where these characters act. The engine is nothing more than like the context for these things to happen. And entities, components, and systems all take care of different things. Entities are stuff. Anything in the scene is an entity. So it actually helps to see examples of these things here. So my chest is an entity, the cart is an entity, this magic cube here is an entity. Now, entities have components. Components are properties of these entities. So close this. So components get a little bit more esoteric, if you will. So a component is a characteristic of an entity. So in this case, if I look at this cart, it has a transform component. And this transform component has information about it. And this includes a position, a scale, and a rotation. And the transform component takes care of that, of defining something's position in space and how much space it occupies and where it is. Then there's a GLTF container component. And this is something that takes care of what this thing looks like. So if you put these things, two things together, what it looks like and where it's at, you get the final emergent property of seeing something there. But components can be a lot more things. It can have an audio component that plays a sound. Or you could even have custom components built tailored to whatever your game logic is. And for example, give, I don't know, something a health component. So this health component will represent how much damage has to be done for this to be destroyed. And you could add that same kind of health component to a tree, to a character, to a rock, to whatever makes sense that it could be destroyed. Now, components are nothing but data. So a component is simply a place where some information is stored. In this case, we're storing information about a position, a scale, and a rotation. And in the case of the transform component and other built-in components, the engine takes care of interpreting what that means and uses that to draw out what you're seeing in the scene. However, if you're building your own custom component, say if you were creating a health component, the component is nothing more than a number. That number really is just going to be a number that will be updated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when that number goes to 0, the object gets destroyed. You actually have to build something that handles that for that to affect what players see in their scene. So that's where the third and final thing comes in, which is systems. Systems have to do with changing things over time. Systems are the actual the actuators, the things that really transform the world. Entities and components just describe a state at a given moment in time. Systems are usually the things that change that state over time. So let's dive into a minimal example of what it would look like to create something with entities and components. That's these systems for a later state. So I'm going to start by creating some little thing. So yeah, I'm going to do this. Const my cube, and I'm going to call it engine.add entity. So now we have an entity called cube. That entity is nothing more than an abstract concept, and it isn't even visible, or it doesn't do anything in my scene until I start thinking about giving it components. So the transform component create is I'm going to give it, and here I got to pass two things. One is what entity do I want to put this in, and what information I want to give this particular entity inside this component. So by the way, if you're familiar with SDK6, you'll notice that there's something which might be a bit striking, a bit unexpected here. In the past, you would write something like my cube.add component, and then say transform. Here we are flipping that on its head, and instead we're doing transform.create, and then we're specifying what entity we are going to assign this to. So this, actually, I remember when I first saw this, it was odd to me, but frankly, it isn't more or less complicated. It's just, it involves the same number of things. It just is more optimized around how things are described internally. And even though you might find it a bit hard to adjust, by the time you've used this a couple of times, you'll just feel it as natural as before. So when I'm standing inside the brackets of my transform, I can do control space and see what things I can put into these properties. So I'm going to put position and create, and let's go for 6, 1, 6. So I'm positioning something in the scene's x-axis on the 6, on the 1 for the y-axis, and on the 6 for the z-axis. So that's going to be roughly in the center of the scene, not exactly, but close enough. Actually, I'm going to delete these systems here, which yeah, they don't really add to what I'm going to do. So right now, what we have is a thing that exists in a position. Now, this thing is still not visible. It's still not good. If I open my scene preview right now, I'm not going to see this thing. By the way, let's, to avoid confusion, let's delete this cube we have here, because yeah, still. So there was a cube in my preview scene here, which we don't want to get confused with a cube that I want to create here. So for now, when this loads, we'll see that we really have nothing. We have an empty entity in a position, but we won't really be seeing anything in that position. Oh, by the way, let's also get rid of this create cube, because that is going to create a cube. Let's actually delete all of this old code from the template. So by the way, an interesting thing, I'm writing this in a function called main. And this is another thing that you will notice is different if you were used to SDK6. In SDK6, there was no main function. You would just write stuff loosely. What this main function does is, it's really a best practice. It's not mandatory to use, but it does make things more stable in the sense that whatever runs here, it runs only after the stuff that has been described here is already in the scene. So for example, if I wanted to create something here that referenced something that I described in the inspector, if I write it within the context of the main function, or like something called by the main function, I know that that thing will exist and will be callable. The same applies to other stuff, like if I want to query the avatar's position or other things, if I do it within this context, I'll be pretty sure that that thing exists, and that thing is already in memory and has values. So there we go. This is our scene. And oh yeah, the old cube is still there because I did not hit save. So once I save here, I should see that cube, see hot reloads, and the cube disappears. Because I still don't have a cube here. I just called this my cube, but it is not a cube. So if I want to do that, I can do mesh, letter and set box, and can call my cube, which is the name of the entity. And with that, we do actually have something in the position I specified. Now there is a cube. And one thing you'll notice is that I can walk right through this cube. And that's because this cube doesn't have a collider. A collider is what tells you, that something has a volume and space and can't be walked through by the avatar, and also that something can be clicked. So what I can do is give it yet another component, and this is called mesh collider dot set box cube. And if I give it this other component, now this entity has both a shape, a position, and a collider. So I can no longer walk right through it. I can even jump on it. And just to add yet one more collider, I can do, yet one more component. I can do material dot set BR, and call my cube again. And now in the properties, see that there's a bunch of things I can configure with materials. I'll do albedo color and color 4 dot blue, whatever. And now my cube should be blue. Great. So we have one entity with 4 components: a position, a visible shape, a collider shape, and a material. And for example, I could, change this set box to set sphere. And suddenly now I have something that looks round. However, the collider is shaped like a box. It's a bit hard to test right now, but notice that if I jump on it, I should be able to walk right up to the border and float right above it. So again, if it set the shape of this to set sphere, and now both would properly match. Okay, so what else can I do with code? I can, of course, click on stuff, and that's when it starts getting more interesting. So there is a pointer events component, but there's an easier way to deal with this, which is the pointer events system, which is a helper layer built on top of other stuff that I will cover later. So if I do pointer event system dot pointer down, I will pass first an object with entity cube, and ops to provide some parameters. But I'm getting used to new keywords. Sorry, I keep getting the wrong characters. And let's see, button. What button do we want to respond to? Let's go with actions. Input action. That's right. Input action dot. Let's go with pointer. Text. It defines what you're seeing when you're pointing at the thing. So let's go with. And the other thing I need to pass here is a function that gets called whenever this object is clicked. So
Hey, Nico, there was a question in the chat. I'm going to read to you just in case you're not able to see both at the same time. They asked, can we create custom shape geometries using mesh render yet, or just the standard ones?
No, unfortunately. It's only possible to use mesh render for specific shapes. Specifically, it's do a box, a cylinder, a plane, or a sphere. And with the cylinder, you can also do a cone if you set the top radius to 0. but it's not possible to do arbitrary shapes based on points. Yeah. Okay, so on pointer down, we have, I hope I didn't busy you with this, but with the information I passed here is, on one hand, what entity I want this to happen on, and a few parameters that include what button I care about listening for, then hover text, like what I want to see whenever I'm hovering over this item, and then there's a function, which for now is blank, and I'm going to do console.relog to print something to my log, and I right click on, it's a sphere right now, but so now when this bigger, whenever I point at it, so you're probably not going to be reading that very clearly, but there it says click me, and if I click, you'll see that down here it says click the cube. But by the way, one nice little thing of the editor is that now all of the log gets written in Visual Studio's log, and that is so much cleaner than the log that you have in the browser, because there's tons of stuff there in the browser that belong to the engine and to a whole world of things that you don't need to know about as a creator of a scene. So yeah, this is a lot cleaner and a lot less misleading when it comes to reading strange error messages that don't really pertain to creating a scene at all. Okay, so another nice little thing is how we can integrate what I'm doing here when writing code to create stuff with what I can do here. So I'm gonna build a little more complete example right now. I'm gonna go to the sci-fi asset pack. Where's this sci-fi? I'm gonna drag this little guy, just one of my favorite items from way back. And I'm gonna call him, I'm gonna change the name of this to something that I can later easily fetch without any spaces mainly. So I call it Droid. And now from my scene, I'm going to do something. Look, engine dot, where is it? Get entity or null by name. And I call this Droid. And with this, I can fetch a reference to that entity that I just added via the UI. So equals to this, and this function is called getEntity or null because it's making sure that an entity with this name actually does exist. And whenever you do this, it's a good practice to make sure that it really does exist. Because right now I know that it exists, but in case I change something and rename it, it might happen that it's no longer there. So with this, I can do whatever I want with this entity and make interactive stuff with it. So for example, do transform.get, and I'm just going to fetch its position. Doing this variable called droid pos, where I'm getting the transform component, and from that I'm going to get just the position, and I can do console.log droid pos. I put there. That's what I want to write. And now with this, I should have something wrong here. For some reason, I'm getting a lot of errors. Why is that? Droid and droid. I'm not very sure what that error is. Oh. Yeah, something is in here. Let's do something. Let's close the tab and open it again, just in case. So in case it wasn't clear, I was fetching an entity with the name droid and calling it droid here in the scope of my code. And in case there was actually something with that name being returned, I want to execute this. I want to just fetch the transform of that entity and just log the position of that entity.
Yeah, there's another question in chat you should be able to answer real quick. Can you add a collider to any arbitrary GLB?
Yes, yes, you can. And in fact, that in SDK7, we've been upgrading what you can do with colliders quite a bit. So in fact, you can even mess around with the properties of a collider. So let me. So I can check this. Say, for example, that I hypothetically was creating a GLDF container component for this my cube thing. And in the properties of the GLDF container, you'll see that there are two new properties. Besides just the source where I'm fetching it, I'm also defining invisible mesh collision mask and visible mesh collision mask. Now, these two things tell me what geometries I want to use for collisions. So I can either use the traditional invisible collision, which is the default, which is the meshes that are named with the underscore collider, or I can instead use the visible meshes as my collider. And this is especially useful in case I have a model that doesn't have that part of the model. And I can even set different layers of colliders to either one of them. So I talked about colliders as being a single thing, but really there are two things that are being handled by colliders. One is the ability to walk through them, and the other is the ability to click on them. And you could use different layers of these geometries for one or the other, depending on the case. And even you can assign custom layers of collision, which you can then, in whatever logic of your game, assign to whatever kind of behavior that you want. So you could have like a completely different third level of colliders that deals with some completely separate custom mechanic as well. So yeah, that is one of the cool new features of SDK7. And for some reason, I'm not be able to log this, which is disconcerting, and sorry about that. I should have tested it more specifically what I wanted to do. But never mind, I'm going to do some more fun things with this still. So one thing I'm going to do is install a library. So you might be familiar with a series of libraries that we had on SDK6, which were the Utils library and the NPC Utils library and the UI Utils library. Those have been ported to SDK7. So if you go over to the awesome repository, you'll see that in the library section, there's a section for SDK7, and we have all three libraries already available to be used with SDK7. And they have a pretty similar set of features as in the good old days, with some extras and with some cool new things. So if I go to the SDK Utils library, I will see that here there's straightforward instructions for how to install this using the editor. So the name of the library is @dcl-sdk/utils. I'm going to copy that. And back in the editor, you'll notice that there's a dependencies section right here when I open the SDK7 tab here in Visual Studio Code. And you'll see that in the dependencies section right now, I have two dependencies which come right out of the box, which are the actual SDK version 7.2.3 in this case, and some extra stuff that I don't need to cover because it's pretty internal and you don't really need to deal with this at any point. What I'm going to do is I can just hit the plus sign, and here I can paste the name of the library I want to install. And this is a Decentraland library, sure. And with just that, I'm installing the new Utils library without having to ever touch the command line as we had to in the past. And there we go. I have the DCL SDK/Utils library already installed in my project now. If we go back to the help here, see that I have to write this line into my scene in order to import the library, which I'll do now. So I'll do this import. And now there's something called utils that I can call from anywhere. So I'm gonna, one sec. I think I know what my problem was before. I think I never saved the scene, including my droid, so it wasn't truly there when I tried to run it. So I forgot to hit the save button. Thought it was just that. And in order to see the droid in my preview, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to reload the scene again. So this utils library includes a bunch of nice little helpers for common things that you might want to do. So in this case, to write utils, you see that there's a bunch of things, and I want to do a tween. I want to make my little bot move. So with tween, start translation, and I'll move from one position to another. You see here, like the first argument is what entity I want to deal with. In this case, it's droid. Second argument is the start position. It's just a random position. Create, and let's say 4.1.4. Sure. And ending position, it's going to be vector 3, 8. Let's say 10.1.4. So that it moves in a straight line. And the next argument I got to do is the duration, how long it's going to take my droid to go and do this transition from one point to the other. Let's say 5 seconds. And with that, I think that I have this, and actually that instead of just calling this tween start right at the start, as soon as my droid exists, instead what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this just to make it quicker. And I'm going to give a pointer events helper to my droid. So the entity I want to deal with is the droid. So if you recall, this pointer event system, what it was doing is it was giving an entity a pointer behavior. In this case, I was just logging, oops, I clicked on Q. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the utils library function to make the droid move. So once I save that, so come over here. Where is my droid? I'm not seeing it. There's an error with the saving of the scene for some reason. I don't know why, but I was not able to hit save. The save icon should be changing when it correctly saved, and I'm not seeing that change. So there might be some bug to deal with. Sorry, guys, this is like right fresh out of the oven, just like minutes ago. So there may be bugs. What I'll do is I'm going to close this and open the inspector once more and add my little droid again. I think that should fix it for sure. And loading the inspector again. My machine is taking its time. Sorry about that. So what else should we discuss? Now, what I'm doing here revolves around using the utils library for some handy helper functions. And these in the background are calling systems, but we never properly looked at a system. A system is basically just a function that runs once on every tick of the game. So by default, the game is running at 30 ticks per second. And if your machine is for some reason going slow, like mine right now with sharing screen and everything, it might be less than that. But by default, it has that interval between each one of the ticks, and the system is just going to run that function once for each one of these ticks. And for example, that's very useful if I want to make something move. In this case, when I'm doing a translation for the little bot, if this were to work properly, I would see the bot gradually moving like 1 fraction of a meter on every one of these frames 30 times per second. There we go. Finally, it's there. And what I'll do is I'll look for my little droid once more. So this is in the sci-fi pack.
TCL Curations had their hand up for a moment. Maybe they
Oh,
had a
sorry.
question.
Oh.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Dave.
I did really quick. So if you're starting off with SDK7, this seems, awesome and extremely intuitive compared to SDK6. But for somebody who has, their scene took like 8 months to construct and it was all built on SDK6, do I have to start from scratch, or is there an easy way for me to start leveraging SDK7 now with what I've already constructed?
Unfortunately, you will have to rewrite the scene. Of course, probably much of the logic of the scene can be translated. But yes, as you can see, the syntax is different. Even the easy things like creating an entity or assigning a component to an entity does require different syntax. So unfortunately, none of the code from the scene in SDK6 would compile and run in this context. It is a big task. We're all very much aware. There are different initiatives to maybe make use of AI to make an automatic translator. To be honest, the things I've seen so far are probably not gonna make it that easy. They are overall quite impressive, but not impressive enough for you to just throw something in and get it spat out with all the brand new syntax. So yeah, I'm afraid it is a significant task to migrate. I'm afraid.
And then I was worried about that. So I guess just follow-up question, will Decentraland continue supporting SDK6 scenes? Or, am I going to, if I want my scene to be up for, years to come, is this something that I'm going to have to go through?
So earlier this week, we published something on the forum where we addressed that same point. So the idea is that, oh, here's my little bot, fine. So the idea is that SDK6 will keep being supported until the end of the year. So we're providing a 6 months grace period for people to do these kinds of things, to migrate their own content, which we know that is a pretty big task. So by the way, this doesn't mean that after this period, SDK6 scenes will be wiped out of the map. But instead, it means that the foundation will no longer prioritize fixing issues with these scenes. It will still be perfectly possible for people outside the Decentraland Foundation to submit fixes. It's all open source, and those kinds of fixes are encouraged. But given that we don't have that much of a big team and we're pretty thinly stretched, yeah, we gotta prioritize, and I think it's makes more sense to focus on one product and making that product well than on supporting a whole lot of versions of a product and barely keeping up. So yeah, we are very conscious and realize how that might yeah, be a significant effort for some people, but it was the lesser of two evils, we believe.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, so sorry for dropping that bomb, but yeah, I think it's the only thing that was reasonable to do at this point. So we have our droid here, and now that we gave our droid an on-pointer component, an on-pointer event, we should be able to click on the bot and make it move. Let me see if I can do that. Perhaps my bot doesn't have a collider, which is perfectly possible, right? Oh, it does have a collider. Should have left that explained already. Sorry about that.
There are a couple other comments, questions in the chat. Let me start at the top here. Somebody was asking if the error handling is going to be any better. So I'm guessing they're asking from SDK6 to SDK7.
Somewhat, but this is still very much ongoing, and yeah, we're gonna be patching things up as we find bugs. What definitely will be a lot better is that if you're looking at the console on Visual Studio Code, you're gonna be running into a whole lot less, noise from things that are not relevant to what you're working on. But we do need to work on getting some of these errors more explicit and more helpful. That's for sure a consideration.
There's a few comments about the struggles of changing their scenes from SDK6 to SDK7 and that amount of time. I want to just acknowledge that I see all of those comments. I'm going to make a couple of notes about those. Nikki also asked a question about if the foundation would be open to creating a DAO proposal to create a fund to pay external community devs to help projects convert to SDK7. I don't think that's necessarily something that me or Nico could really answer right now. Maybe Nico could speak on that a little bit. But I'm going to make a note of that, and we could talk about this farther with the team. So if anybody else has any other questions like that that we might not be able to answer here, feel free to post them still, and we'll try to answer them later if we can better. But Nico, if you could answer that any better, feel free.
As all things in the DAO, it really is up to the votings from the community, but it definitely does make sense. I think it is a very valid initiative. I personally would vote for that for sure. Yeah. Also, someone is asking if the performance in SDK7 is significantly better. It is, yes. And where you'll mostly notice that is when we're dealing with the UI. The UI in SDK6 was an Achilles heel for everything that had a UI. Like it really ate up your performance significantly, especially if things were changing on every frame. Like if you had, let's say, a loading bar or something on the UI, redrawing each iteration of the UI was just painful. With SDK7, we completely redid the UI. And like it's day and night that you can run things that were unthinkable in terms of UI with SDK7. But even when we're not dealing with the UI, it also shows. Like whenever you're updating things every frame, you can really tell that there's a difference. Agreed. Yes, we don't want people to drop off because of these barriers. That's like my main concern here, and that's also why we are putting significant effort in building the editor and all of these tools that we consider to be very helpful in terms of streamlining a lot of the work. The idea is to later go beyond what this UI is showing right now, and also be able to make a whole lot of other features and options also available all via UI. There's also talks about making a web version of this. I don't know if I should say this because this is still very much in early discussion, but this could be ported into a web tool that doesn't even need to be installed. But there's a lot of different projects, and it's still very much in debate what things we need to prioritize around this. But definitely all of the initiatives have to do with making people's life easier and trying to make as much as the work of creating content be either UI based or leveraging libraries which could be created by a few more experienced people and then exposed as easy to use like bundles for other people to not have to reinvent the wheel and sort out the same problems again and again. Regarding examples, in fact, the SDK, the awesome repository is we're currently not adding examples to the awesome repository, but rather we are adding examples to this other page. If you go in the docs to where we have, example scenes, you'll be opening a little tab that, that brings in content from this page here, which is studios.decentraland.org. And you can also open this page directly. And we are curating a whole set of examples here. You can actually filter here by SDK6 or SDK7. You can filter by difficulty mode levels, so you can just go for easy or intermediate examples. And yeah, we're adding as many examples as we can to this page here, which is, and we believe also a bit more, non-developer friendly for that than the awesome repository, which was a GitHub repository, and the fact that it was on GitHub was already maybe intimidated to a few people. But if you click on any of these, you will go straight to the actual GitHub repository for the scene. And in many cases, you can try it out and see the actual scene live and try it out before you download the code and start to develop. So yeah, there is plenty of work going into building up a whole collection of examples that you can leverage from. By the way, in terms of the game jam, I highly recommend you starting out from one of these examples, or spending some time exploring some of these examples, making sure that you understand some of these mechanics. Often the best way to learn these things is to grab an example, take it apart, and understand why it does what it does. Yes, who raised their hand?
For the game jam, are game jam submissions required to be SDK7?
Yes. We are taking this as an excuse to get people to try it out. So submissions will have to be an SDK7, and also they will have to be designed for worlds. So the idea is that if you're not familiar with worlds, worlds are also a relatively new thing. So it's an alternative to building content in Decentraland land. So instead of limited to a single parcel or however many parcels you can purchase, a world is a space where you are not limited by space. The only limit you have is in terms of actual disk space, like how many megabytes the scene weighs in total. I believe the limit is 100 megabytes. But you can make this as large as you want in terms of physical space. And yeah, like the whole theme is tied with that. The stuff like the theme, the prices, and all of that will be revealed on a blog post on Monday. So I don't want to get ahead of that. But submissions will be required to be written with SDK7 and be built for worlds, basically. Any other questions? Otherwise, I want to try to get this to work nicely, because I feel like I left it off in kind of halfway through. So I should be able to click on my little buddy. For some reason, I will not be able to get it. So what I'm doing is I am checking if something named droid exists on my scene. Oh, that's the thing. No, the name of my droid is not droid, it's ball droid. So I need to actually match the name that I'm seeing here with my scene. So I change that and I saved. And now what happens if I have to my little button? Sometimes when the window is so large, I'm not able to get proper click events.
Fractillions is asking, can you import the whole scene files and open the whole scene in SDK7 to play with? The ones from the studio resources, I believe she's asking.
Yes. So many of these scenes are actually stored in a single repository that contains quite a large collection of things. So my recommendation is to actually download the whole package. So there's this repository called DCL7 Gordy Plaza. And a lot of these examples are actually folders inside this Gordy Plaza. You see that there isn't a download button right here on this folder, but if you head back to the main repository, here you can actually download or up or manage with GitHub desktop or whatever it is you have. And you can get like the whole set of scenes, which is a pretty large collection. And I think it's worth downloading the whole thing because like there's a lot of good resources here. I would recommend that. How does this differ from Metagame Hub DAO and DCL Editor? I believe DCL Edit probably meant. How do they integrate, or did I miss that at the beginning? So they do not integrate. The DCL Edit is an initiative done by an external team, and it very much does similar things in terms of allowing for a UI where you can drag and drop entities and then deal with that via code. But it's a separately built implementation of a similar kind of tool. Can you show how to import these downloaded packages into SDK7 real quick? What are we talking about when we say downloaded packages? Are we talking about the libraries? So, for example, if a while ago I imported the Utils library. What if I want to import, for example, the NPC library? I'm going to show that. So the NPC toolkit is the name of the new SDK7 version of the NPC Utils library. And in the README, you'll find instructions. So to install this, the name of the library is DCL NPC Toolkit. And if I go back to my actually, that way I made a pull request to the README just the other day to include explicit instructions for the editor, which are apparently not yet published, but we will show this really easy like this. So if I go to the DCL7 tab in VS Studio Code, notice that here down in the dependencies section, we have the dependencies that are currently installed in my project. I can hit the plus sign and just paste the name of the library here, enter. And there's a question that asks me if this is the Decentraland library. Frankly, like it doesn't really make a difference if I say yes or no. I could answer one or the other, and it doesn't really change anything. That's an option that we actually we need to get rid of that option because it's a legacy thing that was relevant in SDK6, but no longer relevant in SDK7 because like all libraries are really usable. Or not all libraries, but a lot more libraries. There's a lot less restriction in terms of what libraries can be used with SDKs. So. Oh, so we're talking really about the sample scenes. So for example, if I go to one of these sample scenes that we have here, say I want to go to the rotating platforms one. Go to view code. And as I was saying, the code, the link I'm being taken to is a folder inside this Gordy Plaza larger repository. So if I move to the parent folder, I can hit code and I can download the zip, or I can use a command line to fetch it as a Git repo, or I can open it with GitHub Desktop and also interact with it via the UI. If I, for example, just download the zip, see that it downloads like all of this set of scenes, and there's a bunch of them. And once that is downloaded, I should be able to find it up here on the downloads folder. Looks like it's done. I'm not mistaken. Still apparently being processed, I suppose. But it weighs 280 megabytes, which is not that bad considering that it's quite a bunch of scenes, each with their own 3D models. I'm not seeing this yet as a zip file. The download finished, but for some reason I'm not seeing this already interpreted as a proper zip. But it's going to be open when complete. So when I finish downloading, there we go. You can see that this is a folder with a bunch of subfolders. There we go. And I can now open Visual Studio Code in one of these folders. So, for example, open a new window. I'm going to close this here. So that I don't have too many open tabs. So here, Visual Studio Code, I can go open folder and open the folder I just downloaded with all of this stuff. Okay, modified. Random stuff. This starts first step. Come on. It's not. Wait, this is in downloads, straight up in downloads. Sorry, I have quite a mess. My downloads folder should have this cleaned up somewhere. Here we go. This is the folder I just downloaded. If you had a cleaner set of folders, that would have been easier. So I can just choose to open any one of these. For example, I can open this buffer scene. And now that I have Visual Studio Code opened on the particular scene that I wanted to run, I was the author, so sure. I can just run the scene for this one. It's first installing the actual dependencies because there's the folder includes what dependencies it needs, but the dependencies are not actually installed because otherwise the whole thing would take up a whole lot more space. So when I choose to run the scene, that's when it's going to download all of these dependencies just to keep it lighter and not unnecessarily bulk up the folder. And once it's finished installing dependencies, which is still doing, I can run the scene just as I could with the other scene that you were seeing. Now that he's asking that, is it the same process for downloading a builder file and importing it to SDK7? Yeah, it's very much the same process. Except of course that you would have to use it with the SDK7 extension instead of the SDK6 extension, which you would use with something exported from the builder. So now I am running the scene here. And by the way, this example scene has just this one file of code. And this example scene doesn't have, an inspector window because it was created before the inspector was a thing. So this is all pure code describing all of the entities and components that are in the scene. There is no visual editor view because this was done before there was a visual editor. And right now I'm opening the preview to deal with this. Yeah, I agree that the icons for SDK6 and SDK7 are a bit hard to tell apart. Actually, we made the colors different, but that doesn't show, of course, in this black and white view. What I tend to do is I disable the extensions that I'm not using. So if you go here, you can actually mark an extension as, say, mark one of these extensions as disabled. Sorry. Here. Disabled, and it disappears from your, or you need to reload, which I don't want to do right now. And yeah, it just disappears from your workspace, so you only have one of those visible at a time. And here's the example scene, which is a classic puffer fish, which inflates and deflates when I walk near it or when I click on it as well. And all of that is done using the Utils library to transition scale and to add a little delay in between it getting swollen and getting shrunk. Is there a global npm package like before for SDK7, like DCL init? So the DCL, so there is no global CLI anymore. So what we did is it was a constant source of confusion and of issues, making sure that people were using the same SDK version and the same CLI version, and that those were up to date. It was a pretty tedious thing also to make sure that you updated both things. So now what we're doing is the CLI is actually embedded within the SDK version. Whenever you're running a command like DCL start or DCL preview, you were using an external thing, which was the CLI. Now instead, what you run instead of DCL start is npm run start. And what that is doing is it's calling a command that is really part of the stuff that comes with the scenes, part of the project. So for example, if you look at the scripts here in package.readme, see that there's a start, there's a deploy. So you're running commands from off the project rather than from off something external that you need to keep up to date. Now, when it comes to init command, of course, that's something you run before a project even exists. So in order to do that, there is a command which is, I believe it's something like npx start, something like npx Decentraland Editor or something like that. To be honest, I can't recall out of memory. But there is a command to do that as well if you want to avoid using the editor. Although I highly recommend that you use the editor, even if you don't want to use the visual drag and drop part. I believe that's using the UI for installing extensions, running previews, and deploying is like a big leap in usability, and I highly recommend that you give that a try as an alternative to the command line.